On behalf of the entire executive, we're incredibly excited to have you all here today. My name is Noah Brennan, and I use he, him pronouns. I'm a fourth-year student in the Political Studies Department, and I'm the Director of Volunteers with QSAA. Before we begin, please make sure that your mics are muted and your cameras are turned off. On behalf of the Queen's Student Alumni Association, I would like to begin by acknowledging our presence on Indigenous lands across Turtle Island. While all of us here are encouraged to honor the history of the land from your respective location, it's my responsibility to reflect on QSAA and the privileges we experience as a result of a colonial project. Queen's University and the organizations that represent this institution have deep colonial roots, and it is only through colonization and destruction that I have the ability to learn, work, and play on these lands and waterways. We need to be open to the truths of our past and be willing to learn, listen, and attempt to understand our own positions and what has come to us as a result of those who came before. I urge all of us to consider our own positionality as we gather online today. As we all join in from different locations, I would like to remind everyone to please carefully follow our code of conduct. Once again, we ask that all participants please keep their cameras turned off and stay muted during the session. During the Q&A portion, questions can be directed to our moderator, Megan, through the chat function if you do not want to turn your camera on, or through the raise hand function. If your hand is raised, you will be called upon, at which point please turn on your camera and mic before you proceed. The questions can be directed to the entire panel or a specific panelist. This session will be recorded so that students who are unable to attend the live session will be able to watch it after. We remind everyone to please be respectful and have a safe discussion. And now we are going to begin the panel portion of our event, and I will hand things over to our lovely moderator, Megan.
Hi guys, really quickly before we hand things off to Megan, if I could actually, despite Noah's rules right there, ask everyone to turn on their cameras. I'm the marketing director and would love to just get a picture of everyone before we begin. So we'll give everyone a few seconds, if of course you're comfortable. Okay, amazing. You guys are gonna have to hold this shot for a few seconds, but everyone smile. Amazing, and again, and last time. Amazing. After you, Megan, and just before we do start, if you guys, for the best speaker experience, want to turn all of your settings to the setting where you just see the video participants, that would be best. So just a reminder, turn all your cameras off and change your Zoom setting. Thanks.
Thanks, Alyssa. Hi, everyone. My name is Megan DeVicia, and I'm currently in my third year in political science, as well as completing a certificate in business. And I am one of the student transition ambassadors for QSAA. I am very excited to be introducing our panelists that we have here today speaking with us. We are incredibly privileged to be holding such a diverse set of panelists with us today. Firstly, Esther Jiang previously co-founded Grillies, a cricket protein-enriched pasta sauce, providing an environmentally friendly and nutritious alternative source of protein. Through this venture, Esther raised $50,000 in funding and distributed with Loblaws. Esther currently works as a product manager for Coho, a fintech company aimed at democratizing finances for Canadians. Previously, she worked at Shopify in growth marketing. And Esther graduated from Queen's University, gaining her Bachelor of Science honors in 2015. Next, Imran Mouna is the co-founder of a simulation company called InStage. It develops remote training technology for communication skills, professional development, and confidence. Imran has represented the company nationally on CBC's Metro Morning, internationally at the Overseas Talent and Entrepreneurship Competition in Beijing, China, and won first place in Amazon's Education and Training Simulation Competition in 2019. Imran is a graduate of the Mechanical Engineering program at Queen's University. Next, Victoria Preston is the founder of Big Spoon Lil Spoon, a nonprofit organization that operates internationally with over 300 active members. It provides youth with disabilities and their siblings with resources such as cooking classes, life skills workshops, and employment opportunities. In addition to Victoria's own entrepreneurial ventures, she has mentored a team of other founders in the healthcare and technology industries. She placed first at Kingston's largest pitch competition in 2020. Victoria will graduate with her Bachelor of Health Sciences from Queen's University this coming year. And last but certainly not least, we have Scott Mason, who is the co-founder of a medical equipment company called Clean Slate UV that aims to improve electronic sanitation in hospitals. During Scott's time at Queen's, he was the president of ASIS in its 123rd year. After his university career, Scott was with Blueprint Health. The mentorship startup supported entrepreneurs who were building innovative companies at the intersection of health and technology. Soon after, Scott and his startup team went on to 43 North, the world's largest business competition, with their Clean Slate UV innovation. Their team won $500,000 as the competition prize. And today, Scott continues to excel at being an entrepreneur with his Clean Slate UV technology. Well, welcome panelists, and thank you so much for being here with us today. We are very excited to hear from you. To ensure we get through as many questions as possible, I ask that you keep your answers brief to about a minute or a minute and a half. And without any further ado, let's begin with our first question. So our first question for you all today is, how do you perform your role within your company? And what does a typical workday look like to you? Especially keeping in mind the pandemic. And so for this question, we will go and start with Victoria and then go Imran, Esther, and Scott. And Victoria, specifically with your question, being that you're still currently at Queen's, how do you balance all of the aforementioned questions?
Sure, thanks. So I take all of my classes online. Even before COVID, the health sciences program that I'm enrolled in at Queen's has always been virtual. So that's been able to give me a lot more flexibility because I don't have to attend lectures at a specific time of the day and do all my studies in the night and then do Big Spoon and RBC work during the day. But in terms of the way that we've structured things is we have an executive team that manages all of our different locations across Canada. And so those are my primary people that I'm managing and working with on our team to distribute our programming in different locations. And then they would relay that information to their volunteer groups and to parents associated within their chapters in order to get that information across. So it's a lot of virtual meetings using Zoom, communicating with different stakeholders, negotiating different partnerships that we have that are ongoing or newly coming into our initiatives. And it's been a lot of fun so far. It's something that I've really enjoyed, and I'm looking forward to continue working with everybody for sure.
All right, I think it's me next here. Hey everyone, my name is Imran. In terms of how I get through the day, I try and go to bed early the night before and have an early start on it. So I go to bed at 10 p.m. I'm not sure if that sounds early to you, but I get up around 6:45 to try and get the gym in because the rest of my day is pretty unpredictable. As is the nature, I think, of working in new companies. Things pop up all throughout the rest of the day. So I try and get some of the critical things I want done personally in the morning. My role began in software development. And so I built a lot of the technology we use to run our simulations. And as the company has matured, I've started to do a lot of our demos and relationship building. And so I'm usually in meetings demonstrating our simulation technology to new potential customers, whether it's in Zoom meetings like this, these days, showing how we can do simulations online just using your webcam. And previously, it was actually showing people how to put on a virtual reality headset and enjoy a virtual reality experience that way. So the days do vary, but more or less I'm in meetings trying to show people what our tech is capable of.
Fantastic. Thank you for those answers. And Esther, if you'd like to go ahead.
Yeah, so as with everyone else, I've been more or less like working remotely since March, which for everyone has its different perks and challenges. So I guess my pathway of kind of starting in the realm of entrepreneurship and then pivoting into working for a company. So currently as a product manager, I have found that the closest to being almost a mini CEO of your own product while still having a job is around the realm of product management. So my day-to-day more or less, looks like understanding what the overall problem for my specific domain is, taking a look at what feature sets or what should we actually be building, working with internal stakeholders and working with the technical team to understand the best way to build the solution. And then of course, ensuring that delivery. And once it delivers, knowing, did it actually realize the potential that we had originally thought? If not, what learnings could we take from it? And if it did or exceeded, why was that? So it's funny because it's has its own kind of like product feature and ship cycle that I would very much equate to if you owned your own business, but in a much smaller proportion.
Thank you for that answer. That's great. And Scott, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, certainly. It's funny to describe anything that we're doing right now as like a typical day, given the pandemic. But that being said, I mean, it's been almost a year at this point. But our team works almost entirely virtually. Our R&D team is based out of our Toronto office, and we do have employees who pop in and out of there depending on the needs. But our day always starts fairly early, but we have a departmental daily phone call right to start the day, where everybody in the department shares what their priorities are and how other members of the department can assist one another. Again, it's funny because I guess what a typical day at Clean Slate would have been pre-pandemic is very different from what it is now, just given the use of virtual technologies. And as one of the co-founders, I started originally in sales, and now I find myself in a much more operational capacity. And again, the typical day-to-day between that is incredibly different. So a year ago, we would have spent, or I would have spent anywhere between 8 and 16 days on the road, traveling out to customer sites to showcase our product. But in a more operational capacity today, and of course, even even today in the pandemic, even our salespeople their travel is severely curtailed. It's just a lot of presentations over Zoom or phone calls communicating with customers. But a day can be largely varied. But for the most part, I find myself working with our customer care and support team, just ensuring that any issues that customers encounter with our Clean Slate products are resolved as quickly as possible.
Wonderful. Thank you for all those answers, panelists. I think you all touched on the fact that it's a constant balancing act, and I admire that you've all done it so efficiently. So our next question that we have for you is, where do you see a gap in product or organization efficiency? And how did you use your career path to tangibly mitigate this and fill the efficiency gap through innovation and/or entrepreneurship? And for this question, we will start with Imran and then go Esther, Scott, and Victoria.
Sure, happy to answer that, Megan. When we started InStage, we were thinking a lot about how important it is to be able to communicate with each other and share our thoughts and ideas. And one early example we thought of when it comes to how do you practice for something like, a conversation, whether it's, a job interview or a presentation or a group meeting or a team project. There aren't very many ways you can practice for something like that, even though those are really important moments. And we kind of compared that to athletes. If you're a basketball player, you practice on a basketball court. If you're, if you're a competitive swimmer, you're getting in the pool. But for how important communication is, people are still limited to practicing for something like that in their heads or in front of the mirror. And that never feels like what it's like to be across from, a stranger or someone that you're going to work with or meet for the first time. So we saw virtual reality as a way to fill that gap, that piece of learning how to communicate effectively that has for so long just been left to, practicing in front of, if you're lucky enough to have friends who are willing to listen to you, practice a presentation. I think VR can do a really effective job of giving you a safe place to have some of those conversations, make mistakes, and then learn a lot about yourself, because it's a technology that can track a lot of impressive data about you. Things like how many times you say words like or up, where you're looking, and if used effectively, you can really start to build a lot of confidence practicing in an environment like that to go on and get your next job, or to give an effective presentation, or any number of other communication-based experiences. And so that's where I see VR having filled the gap, and now where I see web-based similar simulation technology being able to do the same while we practice to communicate this way, in Zoom meetings like this.
Okay, so yeah, I'll share next. So I'm gonna rewind back to when I was in second year university. I think that was my first foray into anything along the lines of what entrepreneurship looks like. So for context, after first year, I had decided to specialize in environmental science. And then at the time I was like, okay, well, I should probably start gaining some experience so that I'm hireable when I graduate. So how should I go about this? And I remember, going to different faculties, going to different student associations, going to the Career Center where I initially met Ben and Julie Blackstock at the time, and just asking, where I can find these resources. And through that experience, I found that there was a ton of cross-discipline initiatives that were happening that were very much aimed in the area of sustainability, but they were really hard to find in one central place. So I remember thinking at the time, okay, well, if I'm having a hard time finding these opportunities, others might be too. So I remember I went to the Queen's Assis to see if they would be willing to fund a project like this. And I remember at the time you could file for, I think it was like a $500 grant to try and bring your idea to life. So after filing that, I worked with, I think, a part-time student programmer to put this website into fruition. And that was my kind of first thought at, if there's something that you're facing, or, a unique flavor that you want to bring to something that already exists, chances are that there is room in the world for that idea. The next thing, which is more born out of a very personal problem, this was closer to when I was graduating. So I remember at the time, at Queen's pre-COVID, there was a ton of events. So you had formal, you had semi-formal, and multiple events a year. And, when it comes to dresses, we all know that you wear it once and then you can never wear it again. You take pictures, it's all online. Everyone knows that you're going to rewear the dress. But dresses are expensive. Who, on a student budget, where are you going to get the money to buy multiple in a year? So I decided, if everyone has that one beautiful dress in the closet, why not rent it out within students? So I remember at the time, also I went to QSAA, the Entrepreneurship Center at Queen's, and asked, hey, is this an idea that you'd be willing to kind of back or house? And from there, we had a closet of over 100 dresses. I think it's now called Dress Code QU. At the time it was called Let's Get Undressed, but it's a little too spicy probably for school. But yeah, there are opportunities out there. Think of your own problems, think of a unique flavor that you'd want to bring to something that you might see as saturated. But yeah, the world is yours.
So the main gap that we saw when we were developing Clean Slate was, well, people wash their hands, but have you ever washed your phone or cleaned your device? And that's what really the genesis of the Clean Slate idea came from. So our team started working on, if you just imagine a box that you put your mobile device in, and it would kill all the germs on it. And we took this box to Kingston General Hospital, which was is just across the street from Queens. And it was kind of interesting because while we discussed this, we had a lot of trouble. It's funny, the context today in the pandemic actually makes this all, in my opinion, kind of humorous, but pitching people on this idea of cleaning your cell phone back in 2014 was a total non-starter, because we were talking to people and being like, hey, you wash your hands, but have you ever washed your phone? And people just didn't care. But the problem was, and this is the most amazing example of motivated reasoning that you can think of. So if you want to talk about logical fallacies and all the stuff that we try to break down in terms of entrepreneurship, don't do this. We're like, well, we're already building it. We've got this box, it's got UV light in it, you know, like we've been working with this PhD here at Queen's. Like, what are we gonna do? So we took this box and we went to Kingston General Hospital and we said, hey, we have this machine that we thought would be great for cell phones. And you know, what do you think? Is this something that you could be interested in? And these clinicians and hospital administrators, when they look at the box, just started asking us about various items that they used in the hospital and said, like, well, could I put this in it? Could I put this in it? And the answer to many of those questions was just simply yes. And so it's funny because we started off as a solution in search of a problem, because the problem that we had started with was not necessarily a market that we felt, at least at the time, that we could really tap into, or that there was enough demand. One of our big challenges was we didn't want to be a cheap product, and to have the type of UV, the type of efficacy to kill superbugs or really difficult or onerous to kill pathogens was actually quite expensive. And at the time, there did exist many solutions that were cheap for a consumer to purchase, but the efficacy around those types of devices was a little bit on the dicey side. So what we ended up doing was taking the solution that we had developed and then pivoting it towards a more business to business model as opposed to a business to consumer model. Businesses have a higher pain point in terms of ability to purchase. The business use case for Clean Slate outside of the hospital could include food processing facilities, or at the time, cannabis was a burgeoning market as well. So we took this project that we were working on and then went to fit this into a gap or a market niche that actually had a genuine need for this type of disinfection technology. So if I understand the question correctly, in terms of finding a gap and executing on it, I wanted to give that example.
Thanks. So I guess I can go next. So for me, it kind of happened not by accident, but definitely not intentionally. I never had any intention of going into entrepreneurship or into business. I had always taken STEM courses, and I associated entrepreneurship with business and business with like accounting and finance and maybe a 9-to-5 job that didn't necessarily appeal to me, however accurate that might be. And so I just always thought that I wasn't going to be included in business or entrepreneurship. I thought, like, I'm not a software developer, or I'm not going to make the next like Facebook or something like that, and completely omitted social entrepreneurship and other forms of innovation that interest me a lot now, but I hadn't necessarily been exposed to them when I had first started at Queen's. And so I was feeling really homesick in my first year of university and was struggling a lot mentally and physically. And so I enrolled to volunteer in a program called Bobbing Buddies, where we instructed swimming classes to children with Down syndrome and their siblings. And I loved it, and I thought it was so fun, and the kids are so cute. And after speaking more with the parents, I was like, well, why swimming? Like, why is this something that you've chose to put your kids into? And the participant that I was with, her mom said that they live on a house near a lake, and her daughter is a bit of a runner. So she was like, obviously I'm concerned because I want my child to be able to swim. It's a safety hazard and it's a life skill. And so at the time, all of my friends and I were kind of starting to move out of residence and do adult things in our first apartments and houses, like boil an egg and, you know, laundry and cleaning and stuff that wasn't common sense to me, honestly. If it was for other people, I guess I don't know. But I started to realize that there was two communities that I was now kind of part of that were seeming to lack a lot of these very basic life skills that weren't taught to me in biology and chemistry. I don't know about other people. So I thought, you know, why don't we just like start a little initiative? And it was meant to be really small. I had called Loblaws PC Cooking School and booked a class for 20 people, not thinking that much of it, and then sent out an email to different associations, participants, and we reached waitlist capacity in about 20 minutes. So that was kind of the first sign that we had maybe done something right. And at that point, like, we didn't have any volunteers or any executive teams or really anything sorted or any budgets. Like, how I was going to pay for this, I don't know. But it was really exciting time because it kind of solidified that there was maybe a gap, at least in the Kingston market, where we could offer these types of programs. And now we have over 500 active members of the organization across Canada. And so I think that it just kind of shows that, like, sometimes this stuff kind of happens and you don't have to be a specific type of person to inflict positive change, and these types of situations can be kind of thrown upon anybody if you put yourself in that right circumstance to allow them to.
I can tell it's so wonderful hearing everyone's passion. It's so evident that you all are very passionate about what you do, and that is so lovely to hear. I think I speak for everyone here as well that, you know, it's great to hear you can come from many different programs, and there are different ways of getting to the same end goal if you're passionate about it. So thank you for those answers. Our next question is, throughout your undergraduate journey at Queen's, what experiences did you face that prepared you for the position that you're in today? In other words, how did your multifaceted experiences throughout your time at Queen's impact or influence the decision you made to get involved in entrepreneurship? And for this question, we will start with Esther, Victoria, Scott, and Imran. And if you want to touch on extracurriculars that you are a part of or initiatives, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, so during my time, so I spoke a little bit about maybe kind of the first starters at thinking of, okay, what is a gap? How can I fill it? So I remember after going through those initiatives thinking, okay, now it's time to get a real job. So I went to commerce recruiting. I remember I was probably the only person that was not in commerce in most of those sessions. I went to probably like 20 sessions a week, like something ridiculous. And I remember in some of those sessions, like even when asked for a business card because I didn't have any, I just wrote my name on a piece of paper and I gave it to the recruiter. So I was lucky enough that in the summer of third year, I got an internship at Chubb Insurance as an underwriting intern. And I kind of leveraged, you know, my ability to kind of navigate sustainability within Queen's as like a way to get a foot in the door. After that summer, there was just something, you know, that probably wasn't a fit. They didn't want me back. I didn't know if I wanted to go work in insurance. And in fourth year, I had no idea what I wanted to do again. So having that little bit of experience under my belt, I thought, okay, well, you know, why don't I try for a different job? Maybe insurance wasn't it, but maybe commercial banking is it. So I remember I started doing interviews with TD and a few other banks for their commercial banking division. And just through the interview process, like you knew that it was not a fit. And then I think it was almost halfway through my first semester of fourth year that a friend actually forwarded the Queen's Summer Initiative called QSAA at the time, where essentially you got 4 months, $4,000, you could form a team, and at the end of the summer, you could try and pitch for money. And at the time, I had no idea that this was something that you could get paid to do. I think these initiatives that are cropping up more and more are so important for students, you know, to kind of have a fail-safe environment where sometimes money is not a non-negotiable for taking on something, to kind of have that area to play and see what works. So graduating, I decided to do that and just honestly figure it out as I went. And luckily, I'm so thankful for that because it put me in such a different direction. So I guess like coming from that, the one thing that I took with me like throughout Queen's was just curiosity. You never know what options are out there unless you really go exploring. So generally I would say like, if you stick your nose where it belongs, where it doesn't belong, and you continue to do that, you will eventually find like where you're supposed to end up. But I say, if you have an open mind and you continue to be curious about what exists, there is no way that you won't find where you're supposed to be.
So, I mean, this is an excellent question. I often joke that I went to school for political studies. And so naturally, I graduated and went right into medical equipment sales. But it's actually not a joke. It's real. When you spend your time at Queen's doing things outside of your own comfort zone, most importantly, but also just you open yourself to new experiences. It helps you to develop a skill set that I think is indispensable when you get into the workforce. So at least for my time at Queen's, when I arrived in first year, I was really interested in just trying to get as involved as possible with as many different organizations as possible. So I volunteered for the AMS that year, as well as, at least at the time, I hope they still do this, there were internship programs with the student government, and I was an ASIS intern as well. But my experience in orientation really moved me. I found that Queen's did such a wonderful job at making people feel at home that I wanted to be a part of that as well. So when I was in second year, I also, or I guess I applied for it in first year, but I became a Gale, and then eventually an orientation coordinator. And the experience of going through being a participant in orientation to an individual talking to students coming in, and then like an administrator, I guess, of coordinating those different individuals. I actually found that volunteer experience was something that I drew on in third and fourth year, and then in the workforce as well, just learning to work with a diverse group of people and to achieve a shared objective. I really enjoyed my time in student government at Queen's as well. So I continued to volunteer for both the AMS and ASIS in a few different capacities. I was the volunteer student speaker for the AMS in 2013. And that was a really neat role because you gain insight and understanding to what issues are affecting students, and then to see how student leaders are responding to it. But you're completely nonpartisan. So you get to see everybody make mistakes or do, fantastic things. And you can be sort of a silent observer and participate, but, not necessarily through actually taking action. It was really helpful as well to learn about actual policy and procedure, or how to run meetings with that many people. And that's a skill that I think is something at school that we don't often think about, but how do you run an effective meeting? That's a skill that's helpful for a group of 3 or 4 individuals, and it can be as helpful when you scale up to meetings of 50 plus people as well. And so I would credit my time volunteering as the student speaker in terms of developing those skills. I was the ASIS president in 2014, and that experience was also tremendously helpful in terms of developing an entrepreneurial mindset, as well as learning just how best to communicate. Because not only do you have to execute, come up with a platform and try to make the society better, but you have to communicate that to students. It's not really enough to simply have a great idea, but you need to gain buy-in from that idea. And you need to have the support of not just the electorate or the student body, but of the people that you bring in to execute it on it as well. In many ways, I don't think I could have been an entrepreneur if I didn't have the sum total of these little extracurricular experiences throughout Queen's. And no offense to the political studies department, but that course and program was not geared to develop somebody in business. But I would speak to Esther's comment as well, that I enrolled in the QSAA program, and at the time it was called QSAA, the Queen's Summer Innovation Initiative. And I understand every couple of years they come up with a new acronym for it. But the long and the short being, that was a wonderful program that gave us and the members of Clean Slate who participated in that a foundation through which and a framework through which we could develop ideas, work together, and really believe in ourselves that we could create something and change an industry.
I would say, well, I already spoke a little bit about some of the extracurriculars that I was a part of that kind of led to the creation of Big Spoon. But for me, I think when I think about the experiences that I've had at Queen's and kind of what propelled Big Spoon to what it is now, I would say it's the people at Queen's and the community that allows for innovation to take place with young people who are passionate about an idea. And if you want to, secure funding, or you need to get support, or you're trying to figure out what to do next, there's always people at Queen's that are there to help you and have your back. And I think that's honestly why we've had the success that we have. I remember, because when we were first starting Big Spoon, like I said, we were first year students in STEM with no business or commerce background at all, and really had no idea what we were doing when it came to the logistics of running an organization. Like, how do you incorporate? How do you build your team? How do you scale? We had so many questions and didn't know where to get the answers. And so it felt like no matter who we emailed or who we asked for help, 99.9% of the time, people were willing to give you their time and to give you the help that you needed. I had emailed Donna Janiak, who's the vice president of finance administration, I think her title is. And she was like, yeah, I'll meet with you. I'll talk to you about your idea. I'll help you. And her office was like one of the first groups of people at Queen's that really supported us and helped us to organize fundraisers. Despite it not necessarily being part of their role, they were just passionate about meeting with students and wanting to help us. And so I think, them, and as well, I think some of the other panelists also mentioned, of course, like QSAA and the innovation space. But I mean, it doesn't have to just be the innovation space. I think there's always groups and people at Queen's who are willing to support you and give you the tools that you need to succeed. And all it takes is just an email or a message, and they've got your back and they're willing to kind of give you their time. And so when I look back and think, why are we in the place that we are, I would definitely say it's because of the community at Queen's and the people who are willing to believe in young people.
Having flashbacks here of all the good times at Queen's. When I think about the things I got involved at Queen's that sort of led me to where I am now, I had an eye for Queen's way before I went there. I've heard so much about this school. I heard about the traditions, especially in the engineering department, and I wanted to be a part of it. It's interesting you say you worked at Chubb, Esther, because I actually ended up working there as well because of a conference I went to at Queen's. I, again, was in the engineering program, but Queen's makes so many things accessible to you. It doesn't matter really where you get started at the university. You can try all these different things. And so I ended up going to a commerce event. It was the Queen's Commerce Leadership Summit, I believe it's called, despite being in engineering. So I disappointed a couple friends that day, but it was well worth going. Because they had an event there that day where I think RBC was sponsoring that event, or one of the banks was sponsoring the event. And they were just asking for people to jump on stage and tell them some ideas of how they could make, their credit card or their debit card more interesting to students so that, they could get a sign up. And I've always enjoyed doing that kind of thing. I'll talk a bit about some of the other things that might indicate that I've always enjoyed being on stage. But I got up there and I told them that I think it would be a great idea if they made one of their cards something that could give you line skip at stages. So, if you get the RBC card, you get automatic line skip at stage. So I was like, people will love that. And I was joking, more or less, but I did think that was innovative. And a woman came up to me afterwards from the organizing committee and said, I really loved how you spoke. I think it's an interesting idea. I'm not sure if we can do that as a bank, but I'd love to offer you a job at Chubb. And so I ended up working there as well, Esther, and learned a lot about, what a 9-to-5 might end up being like. And so I got a lot of great experience that kind of led me to realizing I would like to work on something of my own, but invaluable experience nonetheless that came from somewhere I wouldn't have expected. Again, Queen's has so many different things you can really get involved in. I saw Existare in my first year. I'm not sure how many of you have seen Existare or if they even put on a show last year, but it was a play that tells you a bit about what to expect at Queen's and all the resources available to you. And so I was in that play in my second year. I loved what they did with it. And so I took advantage of auditioning for that. I got a chance to meet a ton of people far away from the engineering program in the arts, in the sciences. And so another great experience for me. that really had nothing to do with one thing or the other. It just expanded what I experienced at Queen's. I wrote for Golden Words. The application process for that was way less intimidating than I expected, and they were super welcoming. And so just another chance to try something new, really just to get a sense of what I was interested in and what I liked. And Queen's is an incredible place for that. The engineering program itself puts you through the paces that way. We have a general first year. For those of you that don't know too much about how engineering is structured, you get a taste for chemical engineering, geological engineering, civil, all these things that I didn't even realize were options when I came to Queen's. I kind of came there because as a kid, I liked playing with Lego, and I thought, hey, this could go somewhere. And I learned a ton about the options available. And come the day that InStage, the company that we're building now, got started, it was a blend of all these things that made me realize I want to invest my time in this. When I met my co-founder, Michael, and Nicole, they were talking about how can we use virtual reality, like I said, to fill this gap of how we practice communication skills. And for me, it was a light bulb moment because, as I mentioned here, I was on stage in Existare. I was in the engineering program. And so I saw this opportunity to blend two major interests of mine, one being, public speaking and being on stage, and one being this interest in technology and building things. And so suddenly for me, it was like, oh, this is something I want to invest my time in. And so just being able to take advantage of all these different opportunities Queen's has, you might not realize what it connects to, but try it. If you're interested in it, check it out. Write an article for Golden Words. It may lead to nothing. It may end up sparking an idea down the line. If you've heard of Partech, that's another great resource for anyone entrepreneurial minded. They're one of the research firms on campus that will help you with patents. And so I had reached out to them in my 4th year to learn a bit about patents, and learned how expensive they were. So took a step back from that. But the more you try, just the better sense you'll have of what you're interested in. And hopefully it comes together the way it did for me down the line for you.
It's wonderful to hear how active in the Queen's community all of you were. And I know I've been taking a lot of notes, so thank you for sharing all of this with us. And I think we have time for 1 or 2 more questions. So the next question for you all is, what was the planning process like from the start of your initiative to where it is today? Kind of diving after undergrad now. And did you run into obstacles? And if you did, how did you overcome them? We will start with Scott, Esther, Imran, Victoria.
That's a great question. How do you take, we have the saying at Clean Slate that there are no bad ideas. There's just poorly executed ones. And so I think this is an amazing question because, one of the key considerations for any entrepreneur is how do we make this thing real? So it's a long and winding road. And I feel like to give a comprehensive answer would take way too long. So I'll take a little bit of artistic license and try to condense it. But so initially for us, it was all about minimum viable product. It was quite literally, actually that was the entire process in the QSAA program for us. Was we can come up with more like the market. We can come up with all of the data to support whether or not this product or initiative will actually truly be successful. So all the work that went into Clean Slate during that time, was more like a pitch deck or a slides to get investors interested. And the true product development, like the real purpose of what we're doing, amounted to a PhD student and 2 of our engineers, working tirelessly to get this little metal box to work. And here I have no shame sharing that when we did the pitch competition, this little box that they built, which was, I also remember just looking at it the first time and just marveling in the fact that, an engineer can invent and construct, this idea, but the machine worked most of the time. There was a 20% chance, and we got that stat through actually doing it. If you push the start button 10 times, 2 times, it won't stop. So you'd push the button and it would run a cycle, and then it would just continuously, the little tray that was taking the items into the UV light would just go on and on. So my business partner, very smartly said that for the actual pitch, when we did this at Queen's, we attached a little extender, I guess, like a plug extender. And when we did the pitch, he'd push the button, it would run a cycle, and then he would, while he was doing the pitch, walk over and step on this thing to flip the switch to off to make sure that it didn't keep going. So as soon as you actually have some capital, you take your MVP and you start moving towards commercialization, which for us was a very, very long process. We created an MVP after that, that was actually a fully built product that we placed in a number of hospitals in Southern Ontario to get feedback from. But that product in many pieces was actually I guess an MVP that could survive being transported to one of these sites and could be practically used. And there comes a point in any product's life where you kind of have to commit. You make some decisions that you can't walk back. And so at that stage, you're iterating, you're stress testing, you're trying to get as much feedback as possible, but you're always afraid to make that commitment because once you do that, there's no going back. It could be tough to go back to a more iterative or flexible speed. And for us, that decision largely centered around how large does this machine have to be for it to make sense. Because on the one hand, if we made a machine that was too big, we were afraid of intimidating our customers that, hey, this new large piece of medical equipment, where are you going to fit this in your neonatal intensive care unit? But on the other hand, we were afraid of making a product that was too small, only to find out, after commercializing 2 years from now that Apple has released some new iPad that's, making the rounds in healthcare. And since our product would be unable to disinfect it, then, we'd be toast. So we did a ton of market research. We got a lot of feedback from different organizations and settled on a size, and then did our first production order of units. And again, I think I feel comfortable sharing this today. It's a hard thing to do at the time, but it was a disaster. We ordered, you could think of this product, we were switching from the first prototypes and the first MVPs to our first actual clean slate product. And I think a smart person, or even I would say just any reasonable normal person would order 1 or 2. We ordered 30. It was very expensive. And there were just tons of issues with these machines, but we were stuck with them because we only had so much funding. So this Gen 2 of Clean Slate was a really tough era for us because we had a product that looked really great. It looked exactly like what we wanted it to. We had put in all of the design changes that had come from the feedback from our comprehensive pilots, but we were stuck with this machine that had very subpar performance, and transporting the machine was another thing that we hadn't considered. We had to ship these products to customers, and by virtue of just the way this machine had been designed, it was prone to getting damaged in shipment. So it was a very stressful time. At the same time, you're also raising capital. So you want to show investors progress. You want to have happy customers. You want to show people that there's a vision, a long-term vision for your company. So it was all hands on deck for a pretty long period of time, managing a large inventory of not particularly great product. But it did enable us to gain some excellent pilot sites and bigger names in the hospital communities to try out the machines. And our commitment to customer success, I think, really started during this time, because anytime one of these machines went down, either myself or one of my business partners, we would just go out and fix it. It's not exactly scalable, but it enabled us to continue our goal, which was to commercialize this technology. And then that would be the final state. So after the Gen 2, we did what you would call a design for assembly, or a design for manufacturing. And this was another element that was very new to me as an entrepreneur, is once you have settled on the product that you want, once you have identified all the issues and you start to actually go towards commercialization or mass production, you need to do or I guess at this point, like a third or a fourth look at your designs and produce a product that is easy to mass assemble. So basically take all the components of Clean Slate out and then think about how do we put Clean Slate together internally in a way that'd be very simple or easy to put together. Once that process was complete, we then started small batch productions for what we would call the fully commercialized Clean Slate. That process from Queens until that point, now mind you, is much slower given the fact that you know, we weren't an established institution or a really small company. Took, I guess, on the low end about 4 years. And it's interesting looking back because our company is looking to produce new products, and the cycle to go from sort of cradle to production run, we can do in, roughly speaking, a year. Just to give you a sense of how capital constraints and ideation focus and how it can delay the commercialization of a new piece of technology. But that in the short form is sort of the story of how we took the product and fully commercialized it.
Yeah, so it's funny, like listening to Scott's story and, you know, hearing a lot of similarities in my own entrepreneurship journey. I feel like every planning process, as you're entering to try to make an idea a reality, always stems back from you trying to de-risk the product insight. So do you have product market fit, and what is your product, and does it deliver on the insight that you have found? And then the second one is a distribution insight. So like, how are you going to get it to people? Who is actually going to be buying this thing? And how are you going to get distribution to a point where it's meaningful enough where you have a real business? So if I'm going back to thinking about the time when I was working on Grillies, which as a refresher was a cricket protein pasta sauce, because we thought that it was an innovative way that was both sustainable and more nutritious than even, you know, the leanest meats that you can get on the market as a way to get your protein intake. And from the product stage, you know, the biggest challenge that we came up with was, okay, how do you convince people to eat crickets? Because of course there's a mental stigma and it's not something that's common in the Western part of the world. So the way that we try to do was get it in front of people, whether it's small scale at farmers markets, collecting feedback, you know, trying this product in different forms. And what we found was, you know, hindsight is always 20/20, is that in terms of timing for that type of product, we're still way too early. The amount of resources and marketing you would have to put into that to try and do an overall societal change to overcome a mental barrier like that was just too much for us to take on as one company. And if you look at the edible insect market, you've seen kind of a similar trend with other companies who even started before or after us. And then the second insight around distribution, when we decided on pasta sauce, because we thought that, you know, the number one personalization for any person's pasta sauce is adding meat, and it's typically ground beef. So we really wanted to go up against beef because it was the most environmentally destructive protein that is an animal protein on the market. But when it came to having a pasta sauce jar that was in glass, and we found that our main audience was online, a jar was about $7, and to ship that even locally in Toronto was about $10. So our unit economics and our way of scaling did not work. In terms of locally distributing, like whether it's in grocery stores, at the time, only very niche grocery stores would take a product like this. So it limits your distribution locally to like a very set or few number of stores. But online, we couldn't make the unit economics work. So it's funny, you know, this one is not necessarily a happy story that we were able to work through things, but if you're to distill it between, you know, two things that you always need to work through and plan around, it is what is the product and how are you going to distribute it?
All right, I think it was me next there. That's a super interesting story, Esther. I'd love to know more about that. I'm not sure how much more tuna or whey protein I can eat, so send me the link to that cricket stuff. let me take a step back. I think one of the biggest obstacles I faced when it came to starting InStage was just this mental obstacle of making the product perfect before I showed it to anyone. And that was something I learned from my co-founding team. Actually, they were much more comfortable with Scott's approach of plugging in the extension cord and stepping it off. And that was something that took me some time to get used to, but it's so important to getting the product out there and getting people using it so you can use some of that feedback. And maybe that comes from me from having been in plays. Like, you do your rehearsal, you make it as perfect as you can, you get out there on stage, and if people don't like it, like, c'est la vie, that's the play. But entrepreneurship is very different. You need to take that feedback into what you're doing and have it change the product as you learn from that. So that was a huge opportunity for me to do things a bit differently. We built our MVP within about a month with, like Scott mentioned, a ton of things that needed to be improved, but we put it in front of people, which is the next obstacle I wanted to talk about that Esther mentioned a bit here. How do you get people to use it? How do you get that in front of people? And for us, in the early days, now about 4 or 5 years ago, we just encouraged people to come and try it for free. So we would set up booths, we would rent office space, and we would invite people to come out, put on a VR headset entirely for free, just so we could get that user feedback. And it was critical for us because we could have sat in the basement, for the entire, first year, trying to build something we thought people would like, and just put the first 10 people in there and realize they don't care about any of the stuff we've built. They want to make sure that, they can see someone in the virtual audience raise their hand. And maybe we'd get some of it right, but a lot of those insights really do come from your users. And the sooner you can get something in front of them, the better chance you're going to have of making something they want, which is, it sounds obvious, but it is difficult to put something out there knowing it's not in your mind perfect, but it's extremely valuable. The next thing that was, and the only other obstacle I'll talk about, just so we can get to Victoria as well, is that where do you get the street cred to start getting some bigger sales and to start getting bigger accounts? And for us in the early days, it meant putting a lot of time into our early relationships. And not that that necessarily should change, but the team size grows, and the amount of time we as co-founders had to put into meeting the right people, getting the right meetings, hand-holding new users, was extremely high in the beginning. I remember going to, a couple of customers' events that had nothing to do with us, just so I could meet the right people, learn about them, meet them as people, and build a relationship with them that when I brought the product out, we weren't just talking as strangers, as, service provider and client. We were talking as people who knew each other. And that is a high touch transaction, but it made a lot of difference in the beginning, because now we were talking to people who could tell me, candid feedback, whether they liked what we were doing or not. And that in itself is invaluable. So in terms of how do you get the street cred to make big sales, that is an obstacle, but I think it's overcome by putting a lot of time into the early relationships you develop, building a really strong, really loyal community around your product, because then you can leverage those customers and they'll be happy to be leveraged to find your next batch. They'll be the ones excited to say, hey, this is great. Whether it's the dress, whether it's, a product like Clean Slate, and they make a lot of the sales for you. And it's a really nice feedback loop to create for yourself. So those are a couple obstacles there.
I was just actually going to say that I think that everybody else already covered everything that I was going to say anyway. So thanks very much, Esther, Scott, and Imran, for sharing your perspectives on the planning process. I think it was pretty comparable for us as well. So I'll just pass it over to Megan.
Great, thank you. Well, this was all very informative. So thank you to our panelists for providing such great insight. And I want to thank everyone so much for your insights today. We are finished with this portion of the panel. However, we will be moving in to our participant question and answer period now. And I think we will be taking through the raise the hand function or through the chat. So participants, if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat and I can call on you, or through raise hand and you can come off mute. And if there are no questions to start, feel free to send, as I said, in the chat. But as I wait for some questions to come in now, I just want to say how, you know, as a student, myself and a lot of our participants here today, it's really valuable to get all this insight from you. And I think we've all been taking notes. And so thank you, panelists, for, you know, your candid answers and honest answers about your experiences at Queen's and beyond. So we have a question coming in. Here we go. Okay, so panelists, your collective entrepreneurial experiences have ranged from many sectors, including health and technology and nutrition, etc. What do you forecast to be one of the largest or growing sectors of innovation in the coming years? And I invite anyone to jump in if you'd like to.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. We're predicting that I think artificial intelligence and virtual reality will play a huge role in the education sector, especially, you know, if we do continue with a hybrid learning model that we're seeing a lot of schools adopting now. I think it's going to be what bridges the gap between giving people real life experience and actually having them, you know, in certain situations, you know, whether it's wanting to practice for something that's dangerous or the communication skills in-stage focuses on, but we're actually going to see, I think, more and more examples of that becoming obvious in the curriculum or just in the events that schools are running. We're going to be running one actually in March with Queen's. We're going to be bringing the simulation technology out so that students can see what it's like to use a simulation to practice for something like a job interview. And so hopefully we see some of you there out at that event. But I think AI is also going to play a massive role in that. For us, we're using, you know, improving forms of conversational AI to reduce how much manual work we have to put into creating a simulation and making it interactive. So I think that's something to keep an eye on, at least from the sector we're sitting in, VR and AI.
Yeah, I love this question because back to kind of the earlier point around nutrition and grillies and the timing being off, I think timing is one of the most important factors. You know, even for Clean Slate, like I'm sure COVID has like fully changed like your business in such a short time. You can't really help those tidal waves around timing. And for me, it's interesting, like with the rise of the creator economy, I think that's a very interesting facet. I think increasingly everything is going to become very niche. Everyone is going to be able to get a small slice of whatever their specialty flavor on a certain thing, whether it be fitness or food or whatever that might be will. And the other aspect that is really interesting for me is just the idea around how we're going to now build community in these times. You know, I think the way that we used to mix and mingle pre-COVID will come back, but it's going to be a gradual process. And in the interim, you know, whether it's like staying close with your friends, being able to meet new people, I think the days of mass social media where it's one to many is going to be very different in the future. There was a startup called Path, I think 8 or 10 years ago. They tried a model around social media where it was more one-to-one. At the time they failed, but it's interesting now during COVID, they're thinking about potentially picking that back up again. So yeah, with crisis comes a lot of opportunity as well.
I'll speak briefly. I personally think that the internet is going to continue, obviously, to be a huge driver of innovation. But I would say that at least my own personal prediction is that these technologies are definitely in their infancy right now. But I think that access to internet, and not just access from 0 to 1, but like bandwidth, that areas specifically in Canada that are bottlenecked by internet infrastructure will no longer be bottlenecked in the future with the advent of wireless or with 5G or some of these technologies that can give internet via satellites. That over the next 30 years, we can expect, you know, what we would consider to be like a fiber optic connection to be just available in the industrialized world and ideally to the rest of the world very quickly.
I guess I'll go next. I was actually going to agree with Imran. I think that it'll be interesting to see what kind of happens more so in the educational space, just because I know how hard it is for working parents to kind of work and do homework and everything with their kids, and just being someone who is a online distance student, it is a very different experience than obviously being there in person. And so it'll be interesting to see what alternatives people will go to outside of the traditional school system moving forward.
Thank you, panelists. Our next question, I invite on Brandon Cole. Feel free to come off mute and ask your question.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. I have a question for Imran. Now, being a mechanical engineer myself, or I guess in mechanical engineering currently, I'm very curious on how engineering best prepared you for your entrepreneurial career, and in what ways did you need to expand and do some learning yourself in order to be successful in that field?
Sure, happy to answer that, Brandon. Thanks for the question. Engineering as a whole just prepared me for, I like to distill it down to learning how to learn. I felt underprepared to be at Queens for engineering. My high school was great, but for instance, I didn't learn things like calculus in grade 12. And so that was a brand new experience for me. And so I felt constantly pushed to the limit by the program itself. And when I graduated, I was so proud of myself. I honestly felt like I could do anything. Given the time to learn a bit about it and apply myself to the research it would take to accomplish it. And so I think just getting through the program alone is a massive milestone, at least it was for me, in terms of what you're capable of. The other thing I learned is how important it is to have a supportive team around you. I would not have made it through the engineering program if it wasn't for the kind of students that are in that program. I don't know if you've heard what it's like at other schools, and maybe this is a myth, but I've heard it's competitive in the wrong way, that people will deliberately share the wrong answers to assignments. And Queens has a very different approach to that. They're encouraging the group of students I went through the program with, were quick to help and quick to support you if you needed that help. And so I've tried to do that now as a graduate. I've tried to support the people I see needing help, and that's led to some really interesting opportunities and interesting people to work with. Because when it comes to our journey at InStage now, being a part of an entrepreneurial endeavor, even though you think of it something, as something like your idea, you want to make your idea come true, or you want to bring your idea to life, you don't do it alone. You need a really good team around you. And I think Queens fosters those kind of people who can be extremely independent, but work very well together. So hopefully you're meeting those kind of people or reaching out to those kind of people and either accepting that help or giving that help. And if I haven't fully answered your question, just elaborate, and I'm happy to go in further. But those are some of the things that come to mind for me as a mechanical engineering student that prepared me to now deal with problems that really do come from anywhere and are extremely difficult, but that I know I can solve because I made it through Queens, so I'll be fine.
Thank you very much. It's very interesting.
Okay, glad I could help.
Great. Our next question is coming from Gage Benyon, and I invite you to take yourself off mute and ask your question.
Hi, so first off, to all the speakers, thank you very much for sharing everything. That was really, really useful. And I heard a lot of great stories, which was really great. This was an awesome event. My question is also for Imran. Before the event, I was doing some research on InStage, and I was looking at your LinkedIn page and looking at some of the videos you have, and it seems like a really, really cool and really unique software. And I'm just wondering if you have run into any competition, or if there are any other softwares that you're finding you're competing with in the same market.
Yeah, absolutely. We've run into competition, and we did a pitch circuit as well. A couple of the other panelists have mentioned being in pitch competitions. We did an entire year or two of those, and so we needed to be aware of the competition. And at first I was very worried about it. I found it discouraging to hear other companies were building things in our space, but the more I learned about business, because again, my background is in engineering, I realized how valuable it is to have competition. So there are other apps and companies that do speech analysis or do 360 video of what it's like to be in something like an interview. And it's important to know how you distinguish yourself. So for InStage, we focus on making it a very interactive real-time experience. But what I learned from the pitch circuit, and I think this matters across the board, is that if you don't have competition, if you're brand new, you can kind of think of Esther's example of the crickets. It's an awesome idea, but it's so foreign to people that it's very difficult to get the buy-in. And so virtual reality was a bit like that when we started. People didn't really know what it was. They didn't really know how to use it. But as more and more companies popped up, it started to become more familiar. And suddenly it wasn't like, we were pioneering it ourselves. And so we absolutely do have competition. They are different and similar. So we know what makes us different. But it is good to have competition because it proves there's a market for what you're doing. If you're the only one there, surprisingly, that isn't necessarily a good thing. And so, yes, we do. And yeah, I'm grateful for them, actually. There's something to learn from them for sure.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. Next to the question, Gage.
Great, thank you. And our next question is coming from Lindsay Bevan. Lindsay, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to say thank you so much to all of the panelists for speaking today. My question isn't directed at anyone specifically, but my question is, what advice would you give to someone who is interested in the startup world and potentially starting their own venture one day, but not sure where to start? Specifically for someone in fourth year like myself, I've worked for a startup and I really liked it. And I've worked the corporate 9-to-5, which I did not like as much. So what would you recommend moving forward post-grad?
Yeah, so I guess working at a startup, I can speak to that. I totally hear you. I think getting into a startup is a great way to learn a lot about everything and also see where you want to specialize. When looking at, whether it's websites like AngelList or even looking on LinkedIn or Lever, there's a whole host of, websites where you can see what startups are in the area. But the cool thing to also think about now that everything is remote, you're not limited to startups that are in Toronto or even in Canada. So make sure you broaden your search. I think within any startup, usually getting into some sort of support role is a great way to see all the different aspects of what users are telling you that is either wrong with the business or needs improve or any other feedback. And usually those positions are great for a new grad to start in. And I think from there, if you pick a startup that specifically is growing and at a stage where it's still small enough that it still has a big trajectory. So specifically when I actually moved from Shopify to Coho, Shopify is, I don't know, like thousands of people at this point. When I joined Coho, they were actually still at around like 45 people. You could even go smaller than that, but I think the stage at which you join is also really important because depending on how big it is, your breadth of what you see becomes smaller and smaller, and which is great if you know exactly what you want to do, but perhaps a little bit more limiting if you don't necessarily know what that is yet. And then the second thing to look for is a startup that you personally think is going to have a really high trajectory. Because, if you have a small company and it starts, maybe at 10 people, but it doesn't really scale, you won't really have the opportunity to be able to pivot out of that position to see something else. But if you're on a growing ship, there's no chance that you
Esther, I think you might have frozen. All right.
I can just pop in really quickly. Lindsay, if I may ask a clarifying question. Are you asking about getting involved in startups, or are you particularly interested in starting your own business?
Honestly, either. I'm not really sure. I'm kind of so up in the air right now. Starting my own business would definitely be a dream. I don't know how. I don't know what my idea would be. I have no idea, but that is something that I've thought about in the past for sure.
Okay, awesome. So thanks for the clarification. If you're interested in getting into the startup community, I think the answer is a lot simpler, which is just find startups that you're interested in and industries that you're passionate about or activities that you're interested in. and just start reaching out to people. But if your focus is on yourself, ultimately starting a business, I would say there's two ways of approaching this. The first is to come up with an idea, which is easier said than done. But as I said earlier in the panel, there are no bad ideas. There's just poor execution. So even when we worked on Clean Slate, and I actually have corroborating witnesses on this, I'm not making this up. We created a list of 100 ideas. And as a team, we whittled it down to sort of like a top 10 and a top 5, and then eventually settled on what would ultimately become Clean Slate. Which brings me to my second suggestion. So the first is you can start thinking about ideas, and they could be anything. But if you don't have an idea, but you know you want to start a business, that you want to do something either for yourself or to have the autonomy to build something and create value, I would just encourage you to try and find a co-founder or find an institution or group that you can work within and bounce ideas around on. We at Clean Slate, we formed our team before we came up with an idea, which sounds broken and completely ridiculous. But when you think about it, it actually makes sense. If you have a committed group of people who all share a common objective, you'll get there. So my recommendation, if you are interested in starting a business, is find another individual who you trust, somebody who you can envision yourself working with, and start working on it with them, and they will help you to make it real.
Thank you. That's really good advice. Thank you so much.
I want to throw one thing in there as well, unless you had something, Victoria, that you wanted to throw in before I get going here. Okay. This is just some quick cautionary tales. Lindsay, I'll keep it brief as well. And when I think of what I saw a lot of in the early stage startups that I ended up being around when InStage got started, one thing to be careful of is taking on investment. It's something that a lot of people strive for in the startup community, but I think should be something that has a lot of thought put into it. So if you hear of people, trying to get investment really early on, I'd be curious. Maybe one way to test whether you think they're ready for it, or if you think you're ready for investment, is would you put your own money into it? And if you would, then do it, because as soon as you ask for someone else's money, you're in a very different position as a business owner. You have someone to answer to now. You have someone to be accountable for in a very different way, and they have a say in what happens to the business. So what I have learned is that taking that money too early can really hamper the way you develop your business, because like you heard Scott say, they started with a product that they thought was going to do one thing, and then ended up doing something entirely different. And if someone invests in that idea early, they might expect it to do that one thing. But if you decide, hey, there's these other opportunities, we could, grow in this direction, suddenly you're going to run into some very difficult friction to overcome, because you've committed to someone that you're going to do something. So take some time before you take on investment, even though it's one of the most exciting things that people talk about in the early days of a startup. So just be cautious of that. That's just one thing I'll suggest.
Thank you. I really appreciate that as well. Thank you.
Great, and I believe we have time for maybe one or two more questions, but briefly, I just want to say thank you to all the panelists once again for your thoughtful discussions about your experiences. I think we can definitely say, I speak for everyone, that your insights today were very valuable. So now I will call on Munish Jaswal. Please come off mute and feel free to ask your question.
Hi team, thanks a lot for giving me the chance. Basically, I am in MMAI, which is Masters in Management in Artificial Intelligence, and currently I am a team lead with the CIBC software development side. So I have an idea. I have I have the knowledge as well, but I am not in the position to build my app by myself. I am looking for some other guy who can build it. Means I would be giving him the like Scrum Master. I would be giving him the directions, but finally it will be the other person who will be writing the code for me. So any suggestions how I can I told you I have knowledge with AI, I have knowledge with development, I have knowledge with what I want in my idea. So any suggestion? I am very much impressed by Imran that instead of looking for a investment, put your money, but how I can make it possible? If any suggestion, that would be great.
Yeah, I can jump in on a quick one for that, Munish. So to add one point to that, when I say don't look for investment, our big focus in the beginning was to look for paying clients. So you still need that money to come from somewhere. It doesn't have to just be your money. If people are willing to pay for it, you're going to be in an even stronger position to get that investment down the line, because it will show investors that, hey, people are paying for this, you're going to get your investment back. So that's a big focus for us, is are there people willing to pay for what you do? This advice is quick, and it's good you are in a position that you know about the technology you want to build and you're just strapped for time. One great trick my co-founder has used to find developers for us is he will give them a project, a 1-week project. So he doesn't bring them on the team. He doesn't give them all the details out the gate. Give them a project you already know how to build, and see what they come back to you with in terms of the quote and time it will take to do. Because that will give you a reference for who you're working with. And before you decide to, unload the whole idea on them and pay them for months of work, you need to get to know them as a person again, right? Like the investors, get to know them as people. And if you do that, you'll get a really wide range of quotes. Someone will quote you, 10 grand to do something, will take an hour. You'll get people who underquote themselves, so you'll know their experience level, but you will get a good idea of who you're dealing with if you give them a project you already know how to do and get a gauge on that before you start working with them. Keep it to something short term would be my suggestion.
Munish, my recommendation to you would be to ask yourself whether or not you're looking for a business partner or just a contractor. If you're seeking assistance scaling a business idea, or if as you're working full time trying to evaluate, when do I go full tilt into this startup, what you may actually need is something more than a developer. It would be like a business partner, somebody that you can rely on. So the way that you could approach this is to ask yourself, do I just need somebody to do this work and that's it, and to help me evaluate it? And if which case, in door A, you simply need to set aside the funds to hire this individual as either a contractor or an employee to assist you in that. But if door B, you're kind of looking to build more of an organization or somebody who can assist you, you could look at finding a developer with a more varied skill set and invite them to be a part of your team. And by giving them equity, you wouldn't be shelling out any capital, but based off the future value of your idea, that could be quite an expensive decision. But that would be my 2 cents.
Thanks. I just want to take point, like how can I search this guy? Imran gave the suggestion that put it on project, give it on project, but I'm thinking, should I go and put it on some job site that, okay, I need a machine learning engineer. So these things I am really in because of lack of my experience in that entrepreneurial side. I am finding myself like even if on the business partner side, means if I am bringing some business partner, obviously I will need a lot from him, because completely idea is in with me. I have the distribution with me, like near about everything is ready. It is the product which need to be built, completed, I will say. Even build is ready, it is to be completed. How can I approach to find someone for as a machine learning engineer and give him some project and get it tested? That idea, please.
Was that for me, Munish?
Thanks. Please, anyone?
Oh, I mean, it doesn't have to be complicated. Put it up on Kijiji, put it up on Indeed, put it up on any job site that you can think of, or do a quick search on job sites. AngelList is good for investors, but there's a similar version for finding co-founders and finding employees and short-term contracts. You can check out Fiverr is another really great resource for just short-term work if you're trying to get a sense of people. But yeah, you're just looking, I think, to post your job, take a look at the influx of people that are interested and what their qualifications are, but it doesn't have to be too complicated. Reach out to the Queen's network here. There's a ton of Queen students you might be able to use. And I'm sure if you reach out to the QSAA team here, they'll be able to put you in the right direction to at least get get your posting somewhere so you can get a sense of who's out there.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Wonderful, and thank you to our panelists. I would like to ask one more question. Anthony Sequoy, if you would like to come off of mute.
Hi, I wanted to thank everyone for making an appearance today and for speaking with us. I had a question similar to the one asked earlier, just about how you find a business partner and how you go about finding individuals with whom you can work. I feel like that's a struggle for some people if they have ideas, but they don't know how to really put them into motion, to find people who can fill in the gaps in your knowledge and help you grow as a person and as a business.
So I can take that at first, at least. It's a little more challenging because I'd say my more entrepreneurial startup grind mindset is definitely a little rusty, given I think that at least doing business right now in the pandemic is not something I like a startup state that I have as much experience with. But I can speak to my own experience, which was outside of the university. Finding meetups was a huge way of just getting in touch with a tech community in general. Now, obviously, it would be a super spreader event to go to like Tech TO or what have you right now, but I'm not sure if those events are being held virtually. But Tech TO was a meetup in Toronto that was just a really fantastic place to go and meet people. And you can tell a lot about a person just from having a quick conversation with them. It helps you to sort of filter things that, if you're responding to emails or groups, like not being able to see a person's face or to hear them speak presents a bit of a challenge. So actually going out physically, or at least in this case, virtually, to participate in some of those activities can be helpful. While you're at Queen's, I would highly recommend you get in touch with the folks at the Dunan Deshpande Innovation Group, because I know there's a lot of people there who are interested in startups and are probably seeking co-founders. I think that would be a really wonderful place for you to start as well.
And just to add on to what Scott said, I think that first you should look at what skills do you have and what skills do you not have. So for example, I'm someone who likes to come up with a lot of ideas, but I'm not as detail oriented as I would like to be. And so my business partner, Delaney, is very operations based, very detail oriented, and has more of that technical analytical mindset that I don't have. And so I think especially when you're talking about bringing on someone to your team in the very early stages, that's a pretty significant responsibility and role and amount of trust that you're kind of putting into that person. And so you want to be really careful about who you're bringing into your team. So not only are they, different skill sets than you and that they can bring something of value to your team, but you're going to be spending a lot of time with that person. So do they share your values? Are they someone who could, challenge your ideas and be honest about the things that you're bringing to the table and kind of provide honest feedback to you as well? And so I would say first look at what do you currently have and what do you need, but also what's the culture dynamic that you're hoping for in your group, and would that person be a good fit for that particular environment?
Queens has a great summer program as well that a couple of people have mentioned, the Queens Summer Institute, I believe, Entrepreneurship Institute. It's something of that effect. I think the QSAA may know the name, but you can just go there as an individual, and then you end up forming a group of co-founders kind of based on, who's there. So that might be another way to meet some people with similar ambitions.
All right. And Esther, feel free to end us off.
Oh, I was going to say, I think that is beautifully summarizes.
Wonderful. Well, unfortunately, just looking at the time, we are out of time now. Anyone who didn't get to ask their questions, feel free to send it to one of the QSAA staff members, QSAA volunteers, and we'll be happy to get you in touch with some of our panelists. So sorry if you didn't get to ask a question. But with that, I would like to sincerely thank our panelists for being here with us today. It was very engaging and a dynamic discussion, so thank you for all of your insights. I think we all definitely learned a lot from your talk today. And one thing I would like to mention is watch out for a QSAA events, QSAA STEM inspired alumni on February 4th. So watch out for this event coming soon. We are very excited to be offering an online interview simulation through VR with InStage, Imran Mouna's company, on March 3rd. After the event, an email will be sent to your Queen's email with a survey that we ask you to please complete. Once again, thank you to panelists for speaking here with us today. And thank you to our participants for your engaging questions and for coming out. And I hope you all have a great rest of term. Thank you.